If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Law by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the Masquerade. In this episode, we shall discuss all there is regarding the Wyrm, one of the three great spirits of the Triat in Werewolf the Apocalypse. We'll discuss its purpose, origins, and why it is revered and mostly loathed by many of Gaia's children.
We are Gaia's champions, her warriors and protectors. Part of this function is to understand and appreciate the fine balances of life in and around us, and we have failed. This is a difficult truth to swallow, but you must force down that painful pill, cub. Some may argue it is too late to make a meaningful difference, whilst others still cling to hope, whilst others wish to bring about the apocalypse, dine in the fiery balls of glory and honor. Whatever the truth may be, I hope to restore some semblance of peace to Gaia, even if that does mean delaying the dying inevitable. To do this, we must discuss the Triat, three of the greatest entities in the spiritual hierarchy: the Wild, the Weaver, and the Wyrm. Some believe the members of the Triad are great spirits, whilst others think they are a different type of entity altogether. It's agreed that they are beyond mortal comprehension, and they are never encountered directly. Originally, the Triad were in balance, with the Wild creating raw matter, life, and spirit, the Weaver giving form and function to these creations, and the Wyrm destroying them to make room for their creations. This is no longer the case. The Weaver has grown stronger through human influence, while the Wild's power retreats as natural resources are depleted. The most dangerous of these, the Wyrm, feeds on evil and destroys indiscriminately, with its power growing and fears of an impending apocalypse. There are different stories about how these imbalances came about. One common tale is that the Weaver trapped the Wyrm, causing it to fall into madness. However, others claim that the Weaver is insane and the Wyrm's destructive nature is an attempt to restore balance. I hope you would know by now that the Wyrm is our enemy, and what I share with you is to better equip you for the dangers ahead, rather than attempt to indoctrinate you. Why do I feel the need to preface this? Well, most within our nation raise an eye at the fact that the Wyrm is considered one of the higher Celestines. It was originally tasked with cleansing and balancing creation by driving it toward entropy. Its role was to eliminate what the Wild creates and the Weaver structures, ensuring the eternal cycle of birth and death continued. Guru theologians generally agree that the Wyrm was the second member of the Triad to go mad. When the Weaver became insane and began encasing everything in its webs to preserve its creations, the Wyrm was gradually trapped and unable to perform its intended function. This confinement led to its descent into fury and madness, driving it to destroy indiscriminately, regardless of whether something's time had come. Now, the Wyrm exists as a dark god, symbolizing destruction, chaos, corruption, and darkness, the very forces the Guru fights against. Each tribe has its own version of the myths, using cultural language to describe the Wyrm's fall and nature. This, of course, is a short summary of events, as each tribe has different ways of telling the downfall of the Wyrm, so pay attention, cub. In the beginning, before the mortal concept of understanding of beginning, the three spirits of the Guru and Pharaoh known as the Wild, Weaver, and Wyrm exist in an ever-expanding nothingness. They were pure in the sense that there was each no more or less than what it was set out to do, existing to follow its purpose and react to their counterparts, testing the possibility of their powers and their limits, if such a concept even existed then. The Wild was unbridled chaos, pure emotion and change. The Weaver was the inverse, the mistress of order and stasis without value or purpose, the first to master the arts of binding and keeping, granting form to the substance and form to the energies of the Wild. The Wyrm was and still is not either of these things, existing as the border between the two, ensuring balance through decay. I spoke to a stargazer who believed the Wyrm did this by snapping at the Celestine that was out of balance, somehow described the The primordial worm is something of an Ouroboros, whilst some have presented evidence that the worm devoured the excess and replaced it with its own excretations. I shan't share my source of the last one, but you're entitled to believe what you wish. The worm is perhaps the only of the Triad that understood the importance of balance and the harmony that could bring, creating the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Some would have you believe that the so-called Big Bang came from such unity. I've always found it such a stupid name. Typical humans, they're giving such an important name after carnage and destruction, the epitome of their kind. But I digress. This explosion of life, as it were, granted consciousness to not just the life, but the Triad as well. This allowed all life, including the Triad, to reflect on each other's work and existence, and you'll know where this would lead. Total insanity. As we have discussed before, the madness of the Triad is commonly associated with the Weaver entrapping the worm, and all the evil stems from that, but some place the blame on the wild's resilience to be bound to order, or the worm simply failing to uphold its duty, but one cannot blame one over the other. Yes, the Weaver started it, but what we have now is a tango for free. Exhausted from endless destroying the ever-growing web, the worm was confused. The balance it once maintained became stagnant, seen as decay in this physical world and the corruption in the spiritual. With the Triad's balance unbroken, the Weaver's web spread unchecked, leaving the worm trapped. Unable to foster new growth or destroy freely, the worm, now controlled by another, grew desperate, wanted to vow its own tail to symbolize unity, but it now did so out of blind imposed anger. Its struggles only tightened the web's grip, and its original purpose was lost in the agony of its entrapment. The worm, however, had one more ace in this metaphorical deck, and that was the gift of transformation, which takes on the properties of growth and destruction, despite not being directly one of the other. Doing so would allow the worm to squeeze bits of itself through the Weaver's web and manipulate whatever it could to hold of the whatever realm it managed. And this did not happen in one go or attempt. Collectively called the Hydra, the many heads and aspects of the worm make up the Triatic and Urges worms, and all that serve the worm work for one of the Urges or one of the head of the Triatic worm. They manifest in Malpheus, the twisted, chaotic realm of the worm deep in the Umbra, filled with unimaginable horrors that can drive people insane. Ruled by the Melgin Incarna, 13 Banes who often fight each other as much as they battle the Guru. Each controls a domain reflecting their sinister nature. Lady Afe, the Caliph of Pain, tortures the body, while Doge Calypse, the Archbishop of Madness, shatters the mind. The most infamous area is the Black Spiral Labyrinth, a mind-bending structure that drives those who enter into madness. Black Spiral dancers take their name from this maze, seeking dark truths but often losing their sanity. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself, Cub. You're not ready to learn about Malpheus, at least from the Guru perspective and not one of the Black Spiral dancers. Let us return to the transformation of the worm. The first metamorphosis was the Triatic worm, extending into the loosest of the Weaver's webs, serves as the most powerful aspect of the worm. As the name indicates, there are 3 heads, each one unaware of the original goals and motives of the Balance worm, which is said to be buried deep within Malpheus. It is possible for the Triatic worm to manifest outside of Malpheus, so I'm told, but doing so would exhaust great amounts of unequal energy would be needed to send it back. We are talking Croatan Great Sacrifice levels of energy, Cub, which drove the Eater of Souls, one part of the Triatic worm, back to Malpheus. As I mentioned it already, the Eater of Souls, the consuming worm, composed of huge jaws which could open as wide as a python's bite, as a certain dark chronicle details, embodies the worm's relentless drive to consume everything in its quest of meaning. However, unlike the Weaver, which seeks to impose order on creation according to its nature, The Eater of Souls mindlessly devours all in a futile attempt to regain the control it has lost over the universe. The loss of primordial balance left a void in the original Wyrm, and in its madness, it believes that devouring all within its reach will fill that emptiness. On an individual level, this manifests as greed, desire, and obsessive preoccupation, often seen in the pursuit of material possessions, knowledge, or social status, things mistakenly believed to satisfy deeper spiritual needs. Physically, its power can cause the wasting of the body through disease, the draining the victim's life force to sustain the all-consuming aspect. The Magian Furefuge, associated with the Erdworm Letharg, serves the Eater of Souls, particularly in this seeking ways for it to manifest again in the Gaian realms. Next, we have the Beast of War, the Calamity Wyrm, whose head was thick and bony with the massive ramming horns. If the Beast of War embodies the unleashed force of the wild, but instead of a fostering creation, it manifests as a pure, destructive power, while the wild's destructive aspect clears away rigid forms to allow for new growth, the Beast of War leaves only devastation in its path with no hope for renewal. It is the primal embodiment of the Wyrm's fury over its imprisonment, wrath incarnate. This force represents our blind hunger for violence. Without the Predator's calculated focus, the Avenger's release, or the Peacekeeper's regret over the use of lethal force, the Calamity Wyrm rarely deals to directly manifest, as its influence has always been closer to hand in the Gaian realms. In humans, it surfaces as the collapse of healthy competition into bitter conflict, and the bloodlust that, in the chaos of battle, fails to distinguish between friend and foe. In vampires, it is this beast that's said to naught their fragile connection to humanity. Among the Guru, it appears as their rage, which, if not controlled, can obstruct their spiritual gnosis and divert them from their higher purpose. The Geta Fenris, known as Yorgamonga, or however the word's pronounced. I know I should be able to pronounce that fluently, but I am not perfect. The Midgard Serpent, that is, the Magian Incarna, Hellbringer, associated with the Erdworms Ba'ashakai, spread strife and discord across the world in the name of the Calamity Wyrm. The last of the Triatic Wyrm is the Defiler Wyrm, whose head is narrow and pointed, like a needle. The Defiler is the Wyrm's distorted reflection of itself, poisoned by self-loathing for having failed in its original purpose. Once a guardian of cosmic balance, the Wyrm has degenerated into an agent of stagnation and decay, its influence manifesting as the spiritual corruption of the soul. This corruption drives its victims to dangerous extremes, stripping them of free will. Having tainted itself, the Wyrm has externalized its self-hatred, seeking to corrupt and dominate everything in a twisted bid to regain control over the world. The Defiler is the most powerful of the Wyrm's aspects, a silent and insidious force that operates from within, sowing subtle suggestions that lead its prey to willingly submit to its influence. As a tempter and seducer, it is remembered in human mythology as the serpent in the Garden of Eden, and its association with the fallen angel, Lucifer, hints at the deeper cosmic tragedy of the primordial Wyrm. Unlike the other aspect of the Wyrm, the Defiler is so intelligent and self-aware that there is no need for a Malian to Incarna to act on its behalf. The second attempt came in the form of the Erdworms, forming from the desperate and frenzied thoughts of the Wyrm and endowed with a limited degree of independence and autonomy. Roaming free, they insinuate themselves into the heart and mind of any creature that was receptive to their influence. Given their names, these suggest and tempt those who listen, rather than receptive to their influence. Given their name, these suggest and tempt those who listen, rather than manifesting physically. Though it can't break free, its thoughts, desires, and twisted emotions slip through the cracks, seeking minds that resonate with their dark urges. These emotions are far beyond human comprehension, extreme feelings of shame and madness from a force that not one, not even the most enlightened, could truly understand or want to. Once part of the Wyrm's original balance, these urges became corrupted over time, losing their purpose and now preying on mortals who hear their whispers. Their only weakness is their link to the Mlajin, or if a Mlajin, a Dark Lord, is destroyed through its specific vulnerability, the corresponding urge is weakened for a century, though it eventually recovers, while the urge Wyrms easily use mortals, stronger vessels are sometimes needed, and this is where the Mlajin Incarna come in. Powerful spirits that serve as the ruling nobility of the Wyrm's Bane's hordes. Once mortal, they become embodiment of their urges, acting as their eyes and claws to carry out their will. However, other servants of the Wyrm often see the Mlajin as rivals or irrelevant, and not all urges are represented by them. My knowledge of them is rather limited, so I do encourage you to go and research for those who dare to study the intricacies of the Wyrm, but allow me to give you the very limited names of the urge Wyrms. We have Phobok, the urge of fear; Vorus, the urge of greed; Mastrak, the urge of power; Konala, the urge of desire; Abhora, the urge of hatred; Agnur, the urge of cruelty; Bahashakai, the urge of violence; Kalabu, the urge of consumption; Peslak, the urge of lies; Sarakaya, the urge of paranoia; Gree, the urge of despair; and Lethargy, the urge of apathy. You also have amongst them the elemental Wyrms, which are the elemental spirits of the Wyrm itself. Shocking, I know. The elements that comprise the world are reflected in Wyrmish metaphysics, thought to be created from the excretions of the primordial Wyrm, which spread across the universe when the Weaver constricted its body. These repulsive substances manifest physically in the material world, but also have a connection to the components of the conscious mind. These Wyrms lack intention or violation into the Triatic and Urge Wyrms. They exist primarily as resources to be exploited by the other Wyrm's servitors. The elemental Mlajin Incarna can't be linked, not even through rumor, to mortal lives, leading to some to question where their ranks come from or how they are replenished. The known elemental Wyrm spirits are Hirug, Wyrm of sludge, born from the waste of the Wyrm and connected to its sensations; Huga, Wyrm of smog, born from the gaseous part of the Wyrm and connected to its intellect; Thomas, Wyrm of balefire, born from the blood of the Wyrm and connected to its willpower; Waksha, Wyrm of toxins, born from the body influences of the Wyrm and connected to its emotions. There's more to share, Cub, as I've already alluded, but again, you're not ready. Some say I've shared too much, but if I have, I suppose time will tell what Gaia has planned for us both. Morbidity aside, you should have learned by now that the Wyrm is not a villainous, mustache-twirling mastermind trying to bring Gaia down, but a corrupt entity maddened by imprisonment in the webs of the Weaver, who has grown too powerful her original intention and purpose. The Wyrm is a force of entropy, of decay, that too has gone beyond its station. It is subtle and overt, festering in the heart of the greedy and violent, but it is not an omnipresent taskmaster, and directing all the evil doings in the world to the Wyrm is wrong. It may pain you to hear this, Cub, but that is the truth. The Wyrm corrupts and preys on purity. It doesn't make its pawns act, it guides and whispers sweet nectar their willing ears. So whilst anyone can have a battalion of brainless brutes, the Wyrm would rather have loyal followers who can actually produce something meaningful to it, and that is the most horrifying part of it all.
To be kept updated, follow the Lore by Night VTM Instagram and Blue Sky pages to find out when we upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, and you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.